U.S. senators want to prevent another Ukraine from ever happening on Taiwan. Could a proposed bill, the Taiwan Policy Act, going through U.S. Congress, do just that? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks, covering the latest global news and analysis from a Taiwan perspective. I'm Yin Khvat. Joining me in the studio are Stephen Tan, attorney and managing director of International Policy Advisory Group, and Albert Chiu, professor at Tunghai University's Department of Political Science. Our political editor, Rath Wang, is in Washington, D.C. and speaks to Robert Sutter, professor of practice of international affairs at George Washington University and author of more than 20 books, including Chinese Foreign Relations Power and Policy of an Emerging Global Force, as well as Stephen Yates, former White House Deputy Assistant to the Vice President for National Security Affairs and currently CEO of DC International Advisory. We also speak to Teufel Dreyer, Professor of Political Science at Miami University and author of published books including China's Political System, Modernization and Tradition, and Middle Kingdom and Empire of the Rising Sun, Sino-Japanese Relations, Past and Present. Now, in 1979, the landmark Taiwan Relations Act was passed to guide Taiwan-U.S. ties in the wake of the U.S. severing its relationship with the ROC, Taiwan's official name, in favor of the PRC. Now, in 2022, Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chair Senator Bob Menendez and Senator Lindsey Graham want to achieve the biggest restructuring of Taiwan-U.S. ties since the TRA. The ambitious Taiwan Policy Act of 2022 integrates the political, military and economic into one strategy. We start off the show with a report from Ken Ning.
2 months after visiting President Tsai Ing-wen in Taiwan in April, Senators Bob Menendez and Lindsey Graham proposed a radical new legislation in Congress. Its name is the Taiwan Policy Act of 2022, its aim to prevent another Ukraine. The versions passed by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on September 14th would spend a total of $6.5 billion in security assistance over the next 4 years. It also widens the definition of arms from the defensive, currently enshrined in the Taiwan Relations Act, to arms conducive to deterring acts of aggression by the People's Liberation Army. The bill would treat Taiwan as if it were a major non-NATO ally alongside Australia, Israel, Japan, and South Korea, though stopping short of the actual designation as a non-NATO ally. This means Taiwan will be eligible for fast-track arms sales and other increased U.S. security cooperation. The proposal's authors say that it's in U.S. national security interest to defend Taiwan in order to protect the U.S. territory of Hawaii and Guam. They lie beyond the so-called first and second island chains, a Cold War line of defense designed to contain Russia and China. The act also suggests, but doesn't mandate, that the name of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office is changed to Taiwan Representative Office. It also commits to supporting Taiwan's inclusion in international organizations. So, where to from here? Before the bill can be signed into law, it must pass through both the Senate and the House with versions compiled for a vote by Congress. It will then be signed by President Joe Biden. China's ambassador to the U.S., Qin Gang, has said passing the bill would overturn U.S.-China relations. But given the U.S. midterm elections this year, which will dissolve Congress, the bill will more likely be incorporated into the National Defense Authorization Act rather than passing as an individual bill. The Taiwan Policy Act has already undergone changes that water it down, and more is expected.
That was Ken Ning taking a look at the fundamentals of the Taiwan Policy Act proposed by Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Menendez and Senator Lindsey Graham. Albert Chiu, if I can start with you. One of the big ticket items of the Act is the $6.5 billion in security assistance, $2 billion of which is a loan, and it would essentially finance weapons exports from the US to Taiwan for the very first time. What do you make of this initiative?
Well, actually, the introduction of the bill, even if I don't see it is very likely to pass, by the end of the session, is such that really United States made it really clear that the whole strategy against China is from defense to offense, from the kind of defense, what we had in Taiwan, from a deterrent strategy, and by saying that, it does not only mean that the money now they grant to Taiwan or even loan to Taiwan is up to a new level, a record high, but also that the type of military weapons they are willing to sell us will have a different nature from the past. So I can see that's a new era, not only between Taiwan and the United States, but also between the United States and China. So we are all in a whole different game. Again, like what I said, even though I don't see it's likely to pass by the end of session, but I believe that in the future, similar bills like this will be proposed, will be sponsored over and over again. And just like what you mentioned, that several ideas of the bills in the past are included in the TPA. So I will see that's going to occur again in the future.
Stephen Tan, are we in a new era, as Albert Chiu said?
Yes, but I think the United States has made very clear that its so-called One China policy is not being changed and it will not change. And I think this is critically important. If you look at the 6.5 billion security assistance program, and in and out of itself, it's on the premises that if China, unilaterally changed the status quo and unprecedentedly attack Taiwan, and then how the United States is going to be in response to that. And I think this is what the Taiwan Policy Act, or the draft Taiwan Policy Act of 2022 is all about. Of course, there are many, many other things, both substantive and symbolic, to strengthen the support of Taiwan. But then if we look at the 6.5 billion in 4 years for the security assistance program, knowing that the so-called One China policy has not been changed. And what is this all about? What is the One China policy? I mean, if you look at this One China policy, the United States has made it very clear that it's guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 communicates as well as the 6 assurances. And the substance of the One China policy, with so-called One China policy, is basically saying that, yes, there's only one China in the whole world, and yes, PRC administration is the only legitimate representative of China, but as far as whether Taiwan is part of China, it's undetermined and it's acknowledged but not recognized. And this, in and out of itself, has not been changed. What's changed is China. It's China's attitude towards the war. It's China's attitude towards Taiwan. It's more unstable Taiwan Strait and the Indo-Pacific and the world. So I think one thing that I'm not sure I 100% agree with Professor Chiu is that I think there is a chance, and I even think there is a good chance, that the Taiwan Policy Act 2022 will one way or the other pass during this term, either after the midterm election, at least by the Senate. We haven't seen any counterparts that's presented by the House, but then at least by the Senate, or as an alternative through some amendments and some agreement with the Armed Services Committee of the Senate and also the Pentagon, and voted under the 2023 NDNA, which is National Defense Authorization Act. And I do see that there is a good chance that it would be presented that way. I mean, even Washington Post in its editorial not too long ago openly supported the necessity of some kind of law that's similar to the content as we see in the current draft of the Taiwan Policy Act of 2022. So I think in terms of, if you look at the security program itself, I think it creates a concrete support and substantive assistance to Taiwan facing the imminent threat from China these days.
Following on from what Stephen Tan just said, and something that you mentioned in terms of the definition, the change in definition of arms from defensive in the TRA to here, arms that are basically deterrent against acts of aggression by China. What does this mean practically? What does this mean in terms of the arms that Taiwan will be able to get from the US?
Okay, I think the whole situation, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, has fundamentally changed from at least the Obama administration back in 2008, in that President Xi Jinping, from the very beginning that all over the world, including some politicians in Taiwan, thought that he might be a dovish type of character. But when the whole situation into 2016, when President Donald Trump took office, and President Xi Jinping, he really showed his real face, and that is he is very, very aggressive, and also under this type of Communist Party's pressure in taking over Taiwan. And he has a timetable for that, and he has been keep saying that a lot of issues he had to deal with related to Taiwan, especially he's gonna break the norm that been in his third term. Like what I say, he wants to become a king over the China. Okay, so the whole thing that really leads to a scenario or a consequence that the United States has to do something to fight back, or at least to defend the status quo in the Indo-Pacific region, where Taiwan plays a vital role in there. Okay, so that is why what I'm saying here is that the whole thing, it's a game changer now, and for us, pretty much that Taiwan is in the position not actively doing something, but in the United States is, and China is. So that's the status quo I'm seeing right now.
So Stephen Tan, so is it a overhaul of the TRA, and one that is overdue because it's 40 years old?
Well, no, I think TRA or Taiwan Relations Act remains an instrumental piece of the United States legislation governing both the One China policy and also the relationship between the United States and Taiwan. And I think there are lots of voices on the Hill that believe that TRA is not sufficient. There should be something else on top of that, or not in contradiction with the current policy or the current law, including the TRA, but there's something more that would be needed. Taiwan Policy Act is a classic example of the recent efforts. It's in the process, but we'll see that trend. Why is that? You see, this is all about the multiple deterrence, deterring China's aggression, and which is ongoing and which is imminent. And the United States sees that, and the whole world see that. And we're in our own defense, as both President Tsai Ing-wen and Foreign Minister Joseph Wu mentioned that repeatedly, that defending Taiwan is our own responsibility. It's the Taiwan administration's responsibility to its people and to the whole world to defend Taiwan from Chinese aggression and invasion. But then through our efforts, both the government of Taiwan and people in Taiwan, the whole world sees that and come to the assistance, both in terms of security, military, politically, and economically. And then I think this is the underlying principle and spirit, in my humble view, of this draft 2022 Taiwan Policy Act.
Okay, I want to bring Albert in. So in terms of what Stephen said, it's Taiwan's responsibility for self-defense. How would being treated as a major non-NATO ally help Taiwan in this regard?
There are currently 19 non-major NATO allies in the world. Actually, Taiwan was considered as one of them since George W. Bush's administration back in 2003. But that
so you say we're already being treated
only treated, but not formalized legally in a law. So,
but this the committee passed a version that basically said that we will be treated as, rather than being designated as a non.
Then that's official. Right. Okay. So if the passage occurred, then that's official. Okay. And for those countries that are in that category, they are different from the NATO allies, of course, but they do have some sort of, a variety of military, even finance privilege, if you will, from the United States, including United States has the obligation to fund, to loan to those major NATO allies. So I think that Taiwan, if now really seriously thought about, in the Capitol Hill, that be part of this whole program, and that means the military alliance between the United States and Taiwan will comes to a new step, a new stage, where that a lot of deal, a lot of negotiation, even the training from the United States will be above the table rather than under the table like what we had in the past.
I think the amending a few words from the original draft to the current draft that's passed by the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate in that space, from the major non-NATO ally to be treated as the major non-NATO ally, is critically, I think, important because we got the substance, we're very much into the game without getting into the substantive issues of sovereignty. And I think at this juncture, I would rather to see that we got substantive support.
Rather than in name.
Right, and the status, rather than in name, or more symbolic.
But if there's not that much change, except for in name, will it appease the critics? Will this change appease the critics?
Well, I think, as I just put it earlier, I look at the draft as passed by the Senate's Foreign Relations Committee. I don't see, in my eyes, I don't see a deviation from the longstanding U.S. policy towards China and towards Taiwan. So I think it would be it would be considered as a supplement. It would be considered as an add-on. But I don't think this is a major detour or deviation from the current policy. And I think that's more pragmatic, that we in Taiwan will be hopefully receiving the substantive support without getting into the symbolic or even more sensitive sovereignty issue.
Now, as Ken Ning laid out, the progress of the Act through US Congress won't be plain sailing. For one, there will be a dissolution of Congress for the US midterm elections, and concerns in the administration linger over angering China, as National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan confirmed in an interview on Bloomberg's David Rubenstein show. Our political editor Rath Wang sat down with Robert Sutter, Professor of Practice of International Affairs at George Washington University, and asked where he thought the bill would end up.
I've been looking at this issue for a long time. I'm not sure we need this sort of thing at this time. We certainly don't need to rewrite the Taiwan Relations Act. And so what I see is then a process that's been undertaken by a few senators who really want this bill to be passed. But I think that the process is, they only have 2 more weeks in Congress, in this Congress. And so, they may come back after the elections, but probably not. So the Congress will end when they leave to campaign. And so because of that, then I don't think this will get passed as an individual law. I think it's impossible, because they need a House bill, they have to come together for conference, and then they'd have to, the whole Congress would have to agree. And they have to spend all that time when they have so many other things they have to do in this 2-week period. It will probably pass the Senate, and then they might incorporate it into a must-pass piece of legislation. And that most notably is the National Defense Authorization Act. And that bill has to be passed every year. Because you can't, if you don't pass that bill, you can't spend your money on defense. So it really has to be passed. And so, and that's been common, that Taiwan issues would be incorporated into that bill. And so that's what I expect is going to happen. The administration still has the option of, when the president signs that bill, he'll have to sign it, that bill. He can say, I don't like this provision, and I'm not going to do it. He can do that.
A veto.
It's not a veto. No, it's what you call. He signs the bill. The bill becomes law. But this is called a signing statement, and it's used quite a lot by presidents. They say, well, I need to sign this bill that does something that's really important, but this one infringes on my prerogative of as the commander-in-chief or as the lead in foreign policy or whatever, and I won't do it. I will follow it consistent with our one China policy. It's something that could happen. So I'm not too worried about this bill causing a big flap, because the president does have a lot of options on this before it gets done. And so I think I think it will be changed as it goes along in the process.
Going back to substance in terms of military support, aside from an increased budget for Taiwan Corporation, What other areas do you think in this area should be enhanced?
I think this has to be really mutual. I think Taiwan needs to show that it's willing to really bite the bullet on this, so to speak. It's really willing to do the hard things.
And that would be?
More money, more people under arms with training, more active reserves. All of these sorts of things are essential. And so, and if they don't happen, I don't see the United States saying, well, God, we've got to do Taiwan's defense for it. We did that in Afghanistan. We did that in Iraq. We're not doing that. We did it in Vietnam. That's something to remember, please. I mean, but if it's mutual, it'll work well. And I think it will. I'm optimistic. I think people in Taiwan will do it. But it's got to be mutual. And then the Americans can work and say, oh, you do this, we can help you with that, and so on. Then you have a good symbiosis between the two sides. You're seeing that in Ukraine. That's how it can work. That kind of, yeah, we can work with you. And in Ukraine, of course, the U.S. isn't directly involved. The U.S. will be directly involved, most likely, in a war with China. And so then you have to work under those very dire circumstances.
Professor, how likely do you see a war happening between the U.S. and China, given Xi's ambitions, Xi Jinping having Taiwan as part of his rejuvenation campaign?
Mm-hmm. A war with the United States would be an absolute disaster for China, as well as for the United States, and for Taiwan in particular. So I think Xi Jinping understands that very well. And so does he really want to risk that? And I think not. I guess I'm not too, I don't expect to see much of this yet. I expect to see a lot more of the kind of incremental pressures that the PRC has been putting on Taiwan, leading to intimidation. They're trying to intimidate Taiwan and trying to intimidate the United States. And this time with Pelosi, it didn't work very well at all. It reinforced the U.S. Position, and I think it reinforced people's opinion in Taiwan.
Professor, speaking of China, we've seen Xi Jinping cozying up with Putin, especially in light of Ukraine. How do you see this narrative going forward in terms of both Ukraine and Taiwan?
I think what Mr. Xi Jinping has done is clarify for those in the United States that had some doubts that about the relationship between Russia and China, that used to see it as an axis of convenience. They now recognize it's not an axis of convenience, it's an axis. And it's an entente between these two that they cooperate together. They both have different interests, but a fundamental interest in common is that whatever they do, they weaken the United States. And that's evident in what they do, and so we'll see this now, and even in not good circumstances for Mr. Putin, Xi Jinping is still there with him, and still basically committed to cooperating with him.
That was Robert Sutter, Professor of Practice of International Affairs at George Washington University, speaking with our political editor, Rath Wang. Now, while the original version of the Taiwan Policy Act made it binding to change the name of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office to Taiwan Representative Office, the version that passed the Senate Foreign Relations Committee became non-binding. Stephen Yates, CEO of DC International Advisory and previously White House Deputy Assistant to Dick Cheney for National Security Affairs, told Rath Wang that symbolism does matter for Taiwan.
Well, there are a couple areas where people really try to say that the proposals that our members of Congress and others are putting forward with regard to Taiwan are just symbolic. And it's a way of minimizing the importance of them, in some ways suggesting maybe these proposals are inappropriate. One of them is with the regard to the name of Taiwan's representation in Washington, D.C. Everyone in Taiwan should know that the representative office is called the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office. Number one, that's a mouthful. Number two, it's not really accurate. Taipei is a city. It comes no shock to anyone who lives in Taiwan. And So there's been a proposal from the US side to just call it the Taiwan Representative Office. That is brief. It is also very specifically accurate and true. And so over the years, I've always heard people criticize symbolism as somehow risky or unnecessary or otherwise a problem. And I always try to turn the question back to say, why do you have a problem with just speaking the truth? It doesn't suggest that Taiwan is a formal diplomatic partner of the United States. It just says this is the Taiwan Representative's Office. In fact, I think that AIT, American Institute in Taiwan, it makes it sound like it's a think tank. And it ought to be the American Representative Office or the US Representative Office, either one. Then it would be very direct, literal, and accurate.
There have been a lot of comparisons between Ukraine and how China's increased belligerence or, so to speak, aggression towards Taiwan.
Well, I think that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been a strategically important change. Analogies between Russia and Ukraine and China and Taiwan are not perfect. And I can't really speak for the Europeans about what lessons they draw, but there have been European Parliament members who've gotten up and spoken very clearly about the lessons that they draw from the Russian invasion of Ukraine and how they should apply to European views towards the Taiwan situation. They say it was a mistake for the United States, the West, NATO, but especially Europeans to wait until after invasion to provide, for sale or otherwise, defense articles to Ukraine for them to be able to increase their deterrent capabilities and to increase their abilities to resist an attack or invasion once it would start. So looking towards Taiwan, the United States, the Europeans, and others should have active and open dialogue with Taiwan now, elevating the ability of the Taiwan people and their elected leaders to communicate with the world about the challenges that they face and the ways that the people of Taiwan would like to be able to protect and take care of themselves. And that partners of freedom around the world should help provide those capabilities in advance of an escalated conflict and hopefully succeed where Europe failed and deter the conflict from the beginning.
Speaking of allies, do you see the U.S.'s role in facilitating like-minded democracies, say Taiwan, with its closest neighbor, Japan, in deterrence of the Chinese invasion?
Well, I think that Japan's relationship with Taiwan is arguably the most important strategic relationship in Asia for Taiwan, but also for the United States. The United States is far away, and the United States has had an unfortunate experience with protracted wars in the Middle East, and the American people are weary of the prospect of long-term engagements and also bearing the brunt of the military and economic costs and risks of taking on an aggressor on behalf of other countries. And that's what the experience in the Middle East had largely been. We were sacrificing many of our military capabilities, our personnel, and a lot of our citizens' money in order to try to preserve and protect the security and well-being of other people. It's very generous, it's appropriate from time to time, but it's really, really important for everyone around the world to be seen doing all they can to take care of themselves. That's why the Russia-Ukraine situation has been troubling, but is also an important reminder, helpfully to others, that is very important for Taiwan and Japan to meet their own defense capability commitments. Taiwan needs to increase a percentage of its gross domestic product to meet this self-defense need. Japan is in the process of doing that itself in the wake of seeing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I mean, those recent missile tests went over Japan's territorial waters and airspace. And so this threat that the CCP presents is not limited to just Taiwan alone. In Japan, I think more so than Americans understand it. I believe Americans will honor their commitments, but doing these things of your own and together with a like-minded neighbor with a strong relationship gives Americans peace and confidence that it would be a shared effort for shared values and shared interests, and not overly put the burden on America first.
That was our political editor, Rath Wang, speaking to Stephen Yates, CEO of DC International Advisory in Washington, D.C. Let's pick up on some of the points made in those interviews. Stephen Tan, if I could ask you, there was a theme running through those interviews about the self-defense of Taiwan, that it must be mutual between the US and Taiwan, and right at the end there, that it mustn't overburden the US. Now, as you both mentioned, Tsai Ing-wen and Joseph Wu have been very clear that Taiwan's self-defense is Taiwan's responsibility. So what must Taiwan do to show the world that it is serious?
Okay, I think we're showing the whole world that defending Taiwan is the responsibility of Taiwan government as well as its people. No doubt about that, as I just mentioned earlier. And I wouldn't say it's mutual or overburden. I think in and out of itself, defending the country is Taiwan's own responsibility. Our next year's defense budget is about $19 billion US, which is a little bit north of the 2% of the GDP. I think we should, and in my view, we will gradually increase our defense budget.
Is it fast enough, though, given that there are some predictions that China might invade in 2 years' time?
Right. Well, I think we have to do it, one at a time. But I think it's not just increasing the numbers of the defense budget gradually, but more so, I think, is creating a sense of community and a sense of urgency to defend our own beloved country against the unilateral and brutal attack, which could be imminent from China. When people around the world see that, and they will come into our assistance for so long as we come and stand up to defend ourselves. You see a lot of recent efforts made in the civil society by all the community rallying together, trying to support. You see the polls show that a supermajority of the people agree that we extend the military service time from the current 4-month period to 1 year or above. You see a lot of indicators showing that people in Taiwan are more than willing at this juncture to realize that this could be imminent. We have to come to our own rescue so that people around the world will respect us and will assist us. So I think I kind of agree with Bob in saying that, yes, we have to do this on our own. The United States is a friend. It's a good friend of us, but this is our own responsibility. I fully agree with that.
Albert Chiu, there is the side of motivation of the Taiwanese people, as Stephen said, but then the arms is obviously a very important aspect. So coming back to the proportion of GDP, so Taiwan's, as Stephen mentioned, is going to be spending over 2% next year. If we compare that to Israel, which spends over 5%, and Ukraine was spending over 4% in 2020, is it enough soon enough?
Well, actually, I think that the budgets, like just what lawyer Tan mentioned, should gradually increase. And he's also right about it's not only about money, but also about the sense of community. But I do want to add up to that. I think the mentality now in Taiwan has to be reconsidered, especially among the younger generation. I agree with you. First of all, answer your question. I think the budget should increase to 4%, even 5% of the GDP. And the second is that instead of saying things great about ourselves, about our determination against China, that's not enough. We have to do something more materially. In other words, money matters, and also equipment, what kind of equipment we want to have from the United States. Are we gonna engage in a asymmetry warfare type of idea, or we want to have, this kind of traditional larger scale, war strategy? That's all we have to talk about that. And also on the top of that, I think the conscription or the draft, the system, I think, we have to consider over this. We all know that Taiwan is such a democracy that, every politician, regardless of their party ID, they have to face the voter supports. So I certainly can see that this is unpopular to bring this on the table, whether we want to come back to the conscription or the draft, but we still have to do that. And I also know that the United States, especially the Defense Department, they want us to talk about this seriously and take some action on that as well.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, so there's a recent announcement from Vladimir Putin where he's calling up the reservists in Russia. So this really is a big wake-up call. How do you believe that Taiwan is moving quickly enough in terms of conscription, in terms of reservists? Because there's weapons, there's motivation, but there's numbers of soldiers, right? Numbers of people fighting.
Right. I think it will take. I think it takes time, but I think the momentum is building up, exponentially. You see what's happening for the past 6 months, or even since the outbreak of the Ukraine war, that people all of a sudden in Taiwan realize that, well, this is a different ballgame. I mean, this is a whole new world that, we might be facing something in our lifetime, a big change, a big fight, something that could be game changer. And we're very much in the game, and we have to do something to help ourselves. So I think that message is loud and clear. It's related to, or it derives, at least partially from the Ukraine war, from Vladimir Putin, but also from Xi Jinping and CCP and what's going on in China. So you're facing a whole different China now. And China is not a China a decade ago, 2 decades ago, and China is aggressive, and it's not just about Taiwan. Now China is trying to, quote unquote, take over Taiwan, but China will not stop here. Mm-hmm. If China gets Taiwan, then it will move on to the first island chain, second island chain, Indo-Pacific, Pacific Ocean, South China, the rest of the world. Mm. So Taiwan, in that sense, is on the front line, not just geopolitically, the first island chain, but also the sort of the front line or the first step of Chinese ambitious aggression plan. Okay. So we're in alliance with the whole world to come to our own defense, and also to showcase the whole world, and then to make sure that China's aggressive plan will be stopped at this point.
Okay. We'll come back to this topic a little bit later. Albert Chiu, so if I come back to the bill, it was delayed from June, and some are saying because of tensions with China. With House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the administration did not succeed in stopping the trip. Will they succeed in stopping the TPA?
Well, just kind of originally, lawyer talked about the likelihood of the passage of the bill. Actually, there's a technical knowledge I would like to, kind of to talk about here, is that there's a session called lame duck session, just right after the midterm election in the beginning of November. And after the wrap up of the election, all of the senator and also House representative, they have to come back to their seats and wait to do their job as usual until the beginning of the January in 2023. So who knows, those congresspersons will do something, take some action on the TPA. Maybe they won't have enough time to work on this. But like what I said earlier, I think that in the future we will see bills like this on and on, over and over again, and we will see that even the contents itself could be transported to a different bill. So I'm kind of optimistic about that.
Right. Let me just add on a quick word in. I don't think at this juncture the White House has any intention to try to stop the passing of the Taiwan Policy Act. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, previously addressed that there were some concerns, but that's before the passage of the draft and the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate. And I have reason to believe that those concerns, at least partially, if not totally, was properly addressed, and the wording has been amended. So at this juncture, after the passing of the committee, White House openly appreciated the support of the people on the Hill, of the leaders on the Hill, to support Taiwan. And so I don't think there is. So
you don't believe there could be any more changes? There are some quite significant. I'll give you an example.
Right.
So there's also the abolition or the destruction of the removal, of any restrictions on government-to-government interaction. So that would mean that the two militaries.
Right.
And that is actually a huge bombshell that remains in there.
I think there might be here and there some changes and amendments, in particularly if you're talking about whether it will be voted under the 2023 NDAA. Certain things need to be changed in order to sort of vote that in. But then I think the core or the main structure of the Taiwan policy as you see it, I don't think there's a big misalignment between the White House and the Hill, in my view. So I don't think the White House is trying to convince the congressmen and senators not to pass. And then by the way, this is pretty much the turfs of the folks on the Hill. So I have reason to believe that the current draft, as we see it, it might be some alternations here and there, as some of the commentators have mentioned. But I think I'm optimistic to see that it will put through in some form, and I don't think there is the big disagreement or misalignment between the legislative and the executive branches of the government in the United States.
Okay, let me ask Albert Chiu then. So do you agree that there aren't the tensions now that there have been amendments made, there aren't the same tensions between the administration and Congress as there was with Nancy Pelosi's trip? Have all of those issues now been resolved? And I just quickly want to also bring in our final question for this section. Joe Biden said, of course, he is on the administrative side, but he said in a CBS 60 Minutes interview that the US would defend Taiwan in an unprecedented attack. Can you talk about the tensions between the Congress and the administration, and also Joe Biden's comments?
Right. I mean, that's important because President Biden in the past several times said the same thing. And a lot of media speculated that he had a slip of tongue. But my original guess was not. I mean, he was sincere. He was kind of out of control, a little bit not really in line with the Security Council and also the State Department. But he did. Okay, so now he's almost, we see that, reveal his real face, that he will help us, I mean, directly or indirectly, but the United States will do, as long as, President like Joe Biden stay in office, this is gonna happen. Okay, so I think that the whole thing, like what Lawyer just mentioned, that, the whole thing is different now, especially we are seeing a different China. But I also do want to point out that the strategy between the United States and China is from the strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity, which means that a lot of ambiguity has been diminished in terms of military confrontation, in terms of political fight in those international organizations where we want to have a seat for Taiwan. I think everything becomes clearer, and that's also a one-way ticket. You never come back. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, Yin, just let me add on very quickly a few words on President Biden's
Could you also talk about the unprecedented attack that he mentioned and how that could be defined? What does he mean?
Right. Well, I think it's loud and clear that if China changes status quo, the United States will come back and it will defend Taiwan.
Very, very quickly, very, very last question. What do you think President Joe Biden meant by an unprecedented attack?
Unprecedented attack, I guess he implies that if there's a notice to the United States that China is going to attack Taiwan, if there's no some sort of consensus or some sort of heads up, ahead of time, before China's attack in Taiwan, the United States will get involved in it.
Okay, thank you. Now, the Chinese Communist Party claims Taiwan is part of its sovereign territory. This is the reason it gives for its increasingly aggressive military and political moves. To get to the heart of this, I spoke with Taiwan-China expert Teufel Dreyer, professor of political science at Miami University and author of several books, including China's Political System, Modernization and Tradition. I began by asking her about CCP claims that Taiwan has always been part of China.
It's just not true that Taiwan has always been part of China. And what does it mean to say inalienable? Because could you say that England was part of the Roman Empire, which it was? Does that mean that England is an inalienable part of Rome today? So it's just absurd.
What do historians know about the view held by Imperial China of Taiwan?
What historians will tell you is that Imperial China was barely aware of Taiwan. And to the extent they knew about it, they considered it a land of lawless barbarians, meaning people who did not accept Confucianism. And in fact, the original inhabitants were Polynesian, and the Han Chinese came later, and not in many groups. Many of them were, in fact, bandits, and they were escaping because they didn't want to be prosecuted. The Dutch actually imported a lot of Chinese from Fujian province, and that gave rise to what is now known as Taiwanese, Holo. And so in a way, the Dutch were responsible for the Hanization of Taiwan, even though that wasn't their intent. They just wanted good laborers, and the people from Fujian were good laborers.
Some news organizations, including the BBC, say that the Qing dynasty ruled Taiwan. And the UK's Channel 4 goes even further and says that
the island's history is entwined with China's. People have lived in Taiwan for more than 2 millennia, and for most of that time, it's been directly ruled by China, until the country's brutal civil war.
What sort of period did Imperial China actually rule Taiwan, and did it control the whole island?
The Qing were not particularly interested in Taiwan, and it was only when they noticed that other powers became interested in Taiwan that they thought, well, we don't want to have this happen. And in 1884, they made Taiwan a province of China. At the same time, they made Xinjiang, which name literally means new territory, a province of China. But they never actually had much control over either one. And it is very interesting to me that in this day, 150 years or so afterwards, Taiwan and Xinjiang are still troublesome from the point of view of Beijing. 10 years later, the first Sino-Japanese war began, and the Japanese won, as you know, and the Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895 formally made Taiwan a part of Japan. Now, how you say that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China, and it always has been, when you have the Treaty of Shimonoseki saying exactly the opposite, and Japan ruling from 1895 until 1945 is a whole other question.
These media organizations say that Taiwan was returned to China after World War II. What exactly was the situation?
The Japanese are very clever diplomats, and in the peace treaty, they never said that they were returning Taiwan to China. They simply said they relinquished control over Taiwan. They didn't say to whom.
Do you think people are getting confused with the Cairo Declaration and the San Francisco Treaty?
The Cairo Declaration is just a declaration. It has no force in law. And in that, it was not Mao Zedong that was there, it was Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek fled to Taiwan, and the United States at the time was very anti-communist, and it certainly didn't want to have Mao Zedong take over Taiwan.
And Professor, why do you think that respected organizations like the BBC do get these facts wrong?
I think journalists are very busy people, and often they don't get to specialize, and often they have deadlines, and too often they will just pick up a piece of PRC propaganda. I guess the publicity is the more neutral term, and they will write it down without checking.
So does the Republic of China and the Kuomintang, does that complicate this issue? Does the Kuomintang believe that Taiwan is part of China?
The Kuomintang has been very cagey about this, and particularly Ma Ying-jeou. Initially he said, yes, I think Taiwan is a part of China. And then there was a big uproar in Taiwan. And he said, well, what I meant is that mainland China is a part of the Republic of China. He's trying to please the Taiwanese at the same time as he's trying to please Beijing. And you cannot do both.
And coming to the US, does the US believe that Taiwan is part of China?
No. And the US has never said so. The Shanghai Communique in 1972 said that the United States, it said Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. Notice nothing is said about Taiwanese. Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Strait believe that Taiwan is a part of China. The United States acknowledges this. In other words, it didn't say it agreed with it. It said it acknowledges it. So no, the United States has never said that it regards Taiwan as part of China.
That was June Teufel Dreyer, professor at political science at Miami University, speaking to me earlier. Albert Chiu, can I ask you, you heard that June Teufel Dreyer pushing back on the claims that Taiwan is part of China's territory. Recently, a spokesman for China's Taiwan Affairs Office has renewed calls for so-called reunification, saying that the motherland must be reunified and will inevitably be reunified. What do you make of this, and what does the average Taiwanese make of this?
Well, actually, history is one thing, and politics is another. And not to mention that the lifestyle is so important for people in Taiwan that, you know, like my generation, my students' generation, they are so used to this democratic style of life. We have, you know, election held on a regular basis, and we can choose the candidates that we like, we don't like. So I don't see that's a strong explanation from the Chinese government by saying that Taiwan is a part of China. And you know, I can even jump one step further by saying that this is not also from the perspective of the United States. This should be in the hand of our, you know, ourselves, the people in Taiwan. And we choose the lifestyle we want. And we continue the democracy in Taiwan as we wish. So, you know, I certainly, I don't see any reason that we can change this simply from the, you know, historical perspective or, you know, all kinds of debates over there. Even some party wins, it still doesn't matter because this is democracy here. This is a self-ruled sovereignty here. So we decide our own future.
Stephen Tan, BBC and Channel 4, just a few examples of media getting the facts wrong. What impact does these narratives have on Taiwan's position globally? Let me give you another example that just the other day, South China Morning Post says Taiwan and China were separated in 1949 when the KMT lost the Chinese Civil War and retreated to Taiwan.
Well, Taiwan is, as a fact, not part of the People's Republic of China. That is loud and clear, and no one, except for China, denies it. Now, in the PRC's point of view, Taiwan, or Republic of China, as you put it, had long extinguished in 1949. So that view, political or historic view of PRC, is not in line with the rest of the world, including Taiwan. So I think if China takes that view, and I think it's very difficult to reconcile with the point of view of the Taiwanese people and the rest of the world. If both sides of the strait need to make peace, and I think constructive dialogue is critically important. But how to have a constructive dialogue without a precondition or political premises, it's something that a Chinese government would need to think hard on. Without getting into the constructive dialogue and threatening to use the military or non-peaceful way to threaten to overtake Taiwan, it's something that I think the whole world would not allow. But once again, you see in Taiwan facing the threat, and then we have to come to our own rescue. There are a lot of things that we have to do. And then I think there's lots of misinformation. There's a lot of information warfare that we're coming to build up to have a healthier sense of community in defending the misinformation, disinformation, cyber attack, and the